I'm Scott Lennox, and I've been a photographer here in Fort Worth since 1975. One of my favorite photographic moments was putting Van Cliburn on the cover of Fort Worth magazine when I shot for that magazine. I was set up ahead of time, and he walked in and he said, "Who's going to do the retouching?" And I said, "Darling, you don't need retouching." And he looked at his assistant and said, "I like this guy." I produce a podcast every week called The Beautiful Question. Today I just launched episode 176. And some time back I started illustrating every podcast photographically. I like the storytelling possibilities within a photograph, and when the story and the image can merge together, I think the story is enriched and people lean into it even better. We moved to Houston when I was a little kid, and one of the first things my folks did was put me in cowboy clothes, and I guess it stuck. I've stayed with it. The first camera that I used was the one I borrowed from my dad. He had an Argus C3, and I used to take it down and shoot horses at the nearby stables, and I shot trains as they would go by, and I shot the guys that I was in scouting with. Later, when I was in college, I found a Yashica D and shot a ton of 120 film in black and white, had marvelous time with that. When I was in Vietnam, I carried a small Lennox camera, and I was pretty busy doing other things, but occasionally I got the opportunity to take some pretty interesting pictures. And then, not long after I came back, I bought my first Nicormat, and right after that bought a Nikon F2, and became pretty solid in Nikon gear. When I started shooting commercially, I was using Nikons. And then as I started shooting magazines, I went up to Hasselblad and ended up shooting a CM and an ELM and a super wide. And that was an incredible suite of equipment to be using. Right now I'm shooting with a Nikon 780 that I just love. The things that it will do for me just astound me. I stepped away from photography for a while, and when I came back, instead of going analog, instead of going with film, I went digital, and have just been so impressed with what I can do, what the camera will allow me to do, to tell my story. I was fortunate enough to have as a friend and a mentor the late John Howard Griffin, who wrote Black Like Me. He had been a photographer for a very long time, and the day I met him, we talked about his use of photography. He showed me, gave me formulas for making my own developers, and when I left his house that night, I left with an enlarger, an N-Terra 66 enlarger, and all the developing equipment that I needed. That was a remarkable inspiration in my own photography. John Howard Griffin was an amazing man who lived here in Fort Worth. He told someone that he wanted to be involved in civil rights, and the black minister to whom he was speaking said, "Well, you can't understand this, John Howard, you're not black like me." And John Howard said, "I can change that," and he did. And after he traveled through the South, having changed only his color, he came back and wrote about it and published his book, I think in 1958. The book was Black Like Me. He went to New Orleans and talked with a doctor there who had been treating vitiligo, and so he took the injections for that and laid under sun lamps in a hotel for about a week, and when he was finished, he was considerably darker than his original color. Three of the people that I'm following now, one, Chris Hirschman, whose work is amazing. His work has influenced my work, although he does a lot of video and I don't do so much video. He's getting me set up. He was very kind to me and helped me set up the rig that I'll be using as I do my video work. I was also listening to Ted Forbes before I met him, and had the pleasure to meet him here at Fort Worth Camera. And then, oh my gosh, Dixie Dixon. Met her, didn't know very much about her photography, just that she was very amiable and very friendly. Then I went back and looked at her work, and this is a world-class photographer right here in Fort Worth. My advice for people who are following their own vision is do two things. Live it. Think it, breathe it, dress it, live it. And also, don't just watch videos on YouTube. Get with people who are doing something, anything like what you do, and people who are doing things that are way apart from what you do, and be inspired by that. It's that collaboration that really builds people's capacity. Back in the 80s when I was shooting magazines, I had the idea of getting photographers together. We'd meet in this studio or that one or some other studio, and they wouldn't do it. The jealousy in that time was just incredible. Now, I'm elated to know that photographers are open to ideas like that and to idea sharing. Fort Worth continually crosses my mind. We have so much richness right here in this town. Here we are in the heart of the cultural district, where we have some of the finest museums in the world. We have musical venues here. We have the Dickey Center, where everything can happen, from rodeos to car shows to social events of every kind. When I think of the richness here in Fort Worth, I can't think of another city that would compete with it. I'm Scott Lennox, and I'm a Fort Worth Camera Ambassador.